In the year World War II began, a 25-year-old from Algeria sat down to write a book about the absurd. And he opened it with these words.
There is only one truly serious philosophical question: whether life is worth living.
3 years later, the book was published in German-occupied Paris. Its title, The Myth of Sisyphus. People often describe its author, Albert Camus, as a great pessimist, the man who gave birth to absurdist literature. But just because something is often said doesn't make it true. At 28, Camus found an answer to one of humanity's oldest questions: what is the meaning of life? And his answer is one of the most original in world literature, at least in the 20th century. In this video, I'll show you exactly what Camus discovered and why his vision is far more optimistic than people think. After all, the myth of Sisyphus ends with a sentence that rejects hope but chooses a smile instead. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Camus begins his reflection by stating that life is absurd. And by absurd he means the flagrant meaninglessness of the world. He poetically reiterates this throughout the myth of Sisyphus, but he managed to articulate most precisely what absurd means 10 years later.
What provokes indignation is not the suffering of a child as such, but that there is no justification for this suffering.
It is not surprising that in 1922 this captured the very essence of the zeitgeist. The absurdity of the world appears so self-evident to Camus that he makes it the starting point of his worldview and philosophy.
The concept of the absurd is among the fundamental ones and may constitute the first of the truth I possess. A person who has become aware of the absurd is forever bound to it.
It is here that the central question arises with which Camus began his book. What is one to do with this absurd? Should one step away from life, or are there any other possibilities? Camus begins to seek answers in books, among philosophers and writers. He turns to the works of Jaspers, Chesterton, Kierkegaard and Dostoevsky, and he discovers that all of them, in one way or another, make an irrational leap from the idea of the absurd to the notion of an all-explaining God. The implication is, yes, there is no meaning in the world, so one must simply trust in God and stop trying to intellectually explain anything to oneself. Camus understands the allure of such a position, but it does not satisfy him.
At a certain point in his journey, the man of the absurd is tempted. History does not suffer from a shortage of religions and prophets, even those without God. The man of the absurd is invited to make a leap.
The idea of retreating from existence does not satisfy Camus either, and he explains why.
The decision to end one's path, like the leap, is a complete acceptance of existence.
What then remains? According to Camus, for the person of the absurd, there is only one honest choice, and that choice is revolt. Simply put, one must continue to live unyielding.
Revolt gives life its value. When it permeates a person's entire life, it restores its grandeur. For someone without blinders, there is no sight more beautiful than reason grappling with a reality greater than itself.
Do not forget, Camus was only 27 years old at that time. It is not only intellect that speaks in him, but also youth. He is certainly not prepared to throw in the towel and submit to the absurd.
Thus, I draw from the absurd three consequences: my revolt, my freedom, and my passion. By the work of the mind alone, I transform what was an invitation to disappearance into a rule of life, and I reject the urge to vanish.
So, do you still think Camus is a pessimist? In my view, it is quite the opposite. Beginning with the idea of the absurd, he arrives at the conclusion that one must do more than simply continue living. One should strive to live as fully as possible, to seek out the greatest possible range of experience.
To feel one's life, one's revolt, one's freedom, and to do so as intensely as possible, that is, to experience as much as possible.
Or, in other words,
what matters is not to live as well as possible, but to experience as much as possible.
This is where things become truly interesting. Rather than merely urging us to live life to the fullest, Camus presents several concrete role models. How should one live? And what should one do to feel happy in this world while remaining mindful of the absurd that permeates everything? The first variant, Don Juan, the seducer. A man who moves from one woman to another, from pleasure to pleasure. But the idea here is not simply to distract oneself from the absurd through sensual pleasures. On the contrary, Don Juanism is a manifesto of revolt.
Don Juan embodies a quantitative ethic, in contrast to the saint who inclines toward quality. It is characteristic of the man of the absurd not to believe in the profound meaning of things.
The idea here is the same, to experience as much as possible. But while the lover immerses himself in woman only briefly, the actor is compelled to live out other people's life in full, from beginning to end.
The actor has 3 hours to be Iago or Alceste, Phaedra or Gloucester. Within this brief span of time, on a stage of 50 square meters, he summons them to life and compels them to die. Never before has the absurd been demonstrated so well and for so long.
Yes, this too is a manifesto of revolt. As Camus himself says, of all kinds of glory, the least deceptive is that which is experienced in the present.
If the world were clear, art would not exist. Creation is the highest joy of the absurd.
Evidently, this role model is closest to Camus himself. And it is precisely here that he fully unleashed his poetic gift.
Works of art turn out to be the only possibility in this world to affirm one's consciousness and to record its adventures.
To create is to live twice.
Incidentally, note this detail. Don Juanism, acting and creativity, all of these are, in one way or another, ways to live twice. Yet Camus himself synthesizes all these role models differently.
To labor and to create for nothing, to fashion from dust, to know that what you have made has no future, to see it one day destroyed, and to realize that in essence this matters no more than building for eternity. This is the difficult wisdom endorsed by the absurd mind.
I think he would have enjoyed this video. Ultimately, whether it is Don Juan, the actor or the creator, it does not matter. It could just as well be a virgin, a bureaucrat or the President of the Republic, as Camus notes. The essential thing is to look the absurd in the face without averting your gaze. The essential thing is not to deceive yourself into thinking you have understood everything or discovered some deeper meaning. And the best embodiment of this idea, the most representative figure of the man of the absurd is, well, you already know who. Sisyphus is a man condemned by the gods to internally push a stone up a mountain, only for it to roll back down each time. The quintessence of the absurd and meaninglessness. To paraphrase Camus himself, what provokes indignation is not Sisyphus' suffering as such, but the fact that this suffering is meaningless. Of Sisyphus' entire life, only one moment interests Camus, perhaps one that lasts less than a minute. It is that very moment when Sisyphus descends from the mountain, having just once again dropped the stone and realized that all his efforts were futile.
If this myth is tragic, it is only because of the hero's consciousness. Indeed, would his burdens be the same if, at every step, he was sustained by the hope of eventual success?
But Sisyphus has no hope, and he has no God. He is alone in his exile, and he believes that if there is a personal fate, then there is no higher destiny. According to Camus, all is well with Sisyphus. He silently rejoices, for his fate belongs to him alone, much like the fate of each of us.
There is no fate that cannot be surmounted by scorn.
Powerful say it, isn't it? And finally, once more, the main conclusion. I am certain that this time it will resonate differently with you than it did a few minutes ago.
The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart.
One must imagine Sisyphus happy.